Islam and the Arab Awakening. Written by Tariq Ramadan. Introduction. A season of uprisings. It began with fire. In December 2010, a young Tunisian street vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi set himself alight after police humiliation. His body became a torch seen across borders. Within days, cities that had long whispered began to shout. Crowds surged into the streets of Tunis, Cairo, Benghazi, and Damascus, carrying nothing but slogans and faith in one another. For decades, Arabs had been told that fear was permanent, that dictators were unshakable. Suddenly, the walls trembled. The air of those early days was charged with dust and prayer. People marched beside strangers they had once avoided, their voices merging into a single cry for dignity. In Egypt's Tahrir Square, the call to prayer rose between chants for justice. In Tunisia, young men and women stood together beneath banners that read simply, "Freedom." No one knew how long it would last or what would come after. But for a moment, history felt possible again. The revolutions that began in North Africa were not imported ideas. They were born from the daily humiliations of unemployment, censorship, and fear, from decades of rulers who traded loyalty for silence. The slogans, bread, freedom, dignity, were simple but profound, an expression of both political hunger and moral renewal. Islam was not a banner of domination, but a source of meaning, a moral vocabulary through which people reclaimed their humanity. When Ben Ali fled Tunisia and Mubarak fell in Egypt, the victory felt like sunrise after generations of night. Yet even in that glow, unease lingered. Could justice be built where tyranny had stood so long? Would the same powers that had kept dictators in place allow their people to chart a new course? The awakening had begun, but its direction remained uncertain. Chapter 1. The Inheritance of Fear. For half a century, fear had been the region's most efficient ruler. Regimes survived not only through armies and prisons, but through habits of submission woven into daily life. Citizens learned to lower their voices, to distrust neighbors, to hide beliefs behind careful smiles. Religion was confined to ritual, while politics was monopolized by elites. To question authority was to risk everything. This fear was not an accident of culture. It was engineered. Authoritarian regimes used surveillance and propaganda to turn suspicion into an institution. Mosques were monitored, sermons approved, and preachers turned into mouthpieces. The spiritual vitality of Islam, which had once nourished communities, was reduced to obedience. Western powers, eager for stability and oil, played their part. They praised strongmen as allies and branded dissidents as extremists. The rhetoric of democracy was repeated while dictators received aid and weapons. Fear, it turned out, was profitable. The uprisings broke this long hypnosis. When people discovered the strength of collective courage, the architecture of fear began to crumble. In the squares and streets, individuals who had never spoken publicly before shouted truth to power. Yet liberation carried its own fragility. Systems of oppression do not vanish when a leader falls. They live on in bureaucracy, economy, and even memory. The struggle after the revolution was to unlearn fear completely, to build societies where dignity was not a momentary outburst, but a permanent condition. Chapter 2. Islam and the Question of Freedom. For centuries, outsiders insisted that Islam and freedom were incompatible, that Muslims sought submission, not liberty. The revolutions refuted this myth in the most visible way. Millions who prayed turned their faith into an engine of emancipation. Their cries for reform echoed the Quranic demand for justice and the prophetic call to defend the oppressed. At the heart of Islam lies the conviction that every human being possesses dignity by virtue of being God's creation. Freedom, therefore, is not a Western invention, but an intrinsic moral right. It begins with the liberation of conscience, freedom from fear, from oppression, from moral apathy. The revolutions expressed this deeper yearning, to live as responsible moral agents rather than as subjects ruled by decree. Yet the moment religion returned to public life, new conflicts emerged. Some movements sought to impose their interpretation of Islam through politics, turning faith into a tool of power. Others reacted by demanding strict secularism, convinced that religion must stay behind closed doors. The resulting polarization threatened to suffocate the delicate spirit of the awakening. True freedom, however, requires neither theocracy nor banishment of faith. It requires a moral democracy, one that allows Islam's ethical vision to inspire justice without monopolizing truth. The revolution's challenge was not to make Islam political, but to make politics ethical. That remains the unfinished task of the Arab awakening. Chapter 3: The West and the Illusion of Partnership. As crowds filled Arab capitals, Western leaders spoke of solidarity. They celebrated courage and promised support. Yet behind their words lay hesitation. The very regimes now collapsing had been their allies, custodians of oil routes, counter-terrorism partners, protectors of foreign investments. The West's relationship with the Arab world was built not on democracy, but on convenience. When the uprisings began, this hypocrisy was laid bare. Intervention came swiftly in Libya under the banner of humanitarianism, but silence prevailed in Bahrain, where protesters were crushed. Elections in Tunisia were applauded. Those in Egypt, once they brought Islamists to power, provoked panic. The message was clear. Democracy was welcome only when it produced familiar results. This double standard revealed how deeply the Arab world's fate remained entangled with global hierarchies. Political independence had not erased economic dependency or strategic subordination. The revolutions sought to end not only dictatorship, but also the external manipulation that sustained it. True awakening demanded an end to this illusion of partnership, a refusal to measure progress by Western approval. It called for intellectual decolonization, a recovery of confidence, an insistence on self-definition. Only when societies free themselves from the need to mimic or please can they build systems that reflect their own values and histories. Chapter 4: The Betrayal Within. After the first victories, internal fractures emerged. In Egypt, polarization deepened between secularists and Islamists until the army returned as savior. In Tunisia, ideological mistrust clouded dialogue and slowed reform. Elsewhere, revolution gave way to civil war or authoritarian revival. The very unity that had toppled dictators dissolved into suspicion and rivalry. Power, once seized, proved seductive. Those who had fought oppression began reproducing its methods, silencing critics, manipulating faith, and invoking security to justify control. The moral clarity of the streets blurred in the corridors of government. What began as a collective awakening risked ending as a reshuffling of elites. The deeper tragedy lay not only in politics, but in hearts. Authoritarianism had shaped habits of thought, impatience with dissent, a longing for strong leaders, a mistrust of difference. Even revolutionary minds carried remnants of the old order within them. The renewal that began in public squares needed to continue in private conscience. Real revolution, it became clear, requires moral transformation. Freedom is sustained not by constitutions alone, but by the courage to act with humility and integrity. Without this ethical grounding, every change of power risks becoming another cycle of betrayal. Chapter 5: A Global Awakening. The Arab uprisings were not isolated explosions, but part of a wider human restlessness. Across continents, citizens questioned systems that prized profit over justice. In Europe, protests erupted in Madrid and Athens. In New York, crowds occupied public parks to denounce inequality. The same frustration that fueled chants in Cairo echoed in the voices of students and workers from Delhi to São Paulo. The resonance between these movements revealed that the longing for dignity knows no borders. What distinguished the Arab awakening was its spiritual dimension, the insistence that political renewal must be accompanied by moral rebirth. Where others marched for wages or reform, Arab protesters carried the word karama, dignity, as both goal and compass. This interconnectedness marked a shift in global consciousness. The age of isolated revolutions was ending. The struggle against tyranny, whether political, economic, or cultural, was becoming a shared project. The Arab awakening, with all its failures and hopes, formed one strand of a broader tapestry of human resistance. Its lesson reached beyond the region. Freedom without ethics becomes chaos, and ethics without freedom becomes hypocrisy. The task was to hold both together, crafting a civilization that honors material progress while preserving spiritual purpose. Chapter 6: Faith After the Revolutions. When the dust settled, disappointment replaced euphoria. Regimes fell, but corruption lingered. New rulers rose, promising change but delivering control. In some places, revolution gave way to civil war. Many who had believed in transformation began to doubt whether anything had truly changed. Amid the disillusionment, faith was tested. Some withdrew into despair. Others turned to extremism, mistaking vengeance for purity. Yet the essence of the awakening lay not in victory, but in endurance, the capacity to hold faith when hope seemed absent. Islam's message, centered on justice and mercy, offered a way to navigate defeat without surrendering to cynicism. Renewal begins with the self. When societies lose their compass, individuals must embody the ethics they seek. Justice is not decreed from above. It is cultivated through everyday compassion and courage. The revolutions may have failed politically, but their spiritual seeds remain alive in countless small acts of integrity, in teachers who refuse corruption, in journalists who tell the truth, in believers who pray for peace, yet work for reform. Faith after the revolutions means refusing both authoritarian manipulation and violent absolutism. It is the quiet conviction that moral transformation is a form of resistance, that living ethically is itself a political act. Conclusion: the work of awakening. The Arab Spring was never a single season. It was the beginning of an age of reckoning. It exposed both the brutality of regimes and the resilience of their peoples. It showed that freedom cannot be gifted by outsiders or guaranteed by ideology. It must be nurtured through justice, humility, and perseverance. The real awakening lies not in toppled statues or elections held under banners of reform, but in the awakening of conscience. When ordinary people reject the logic of fear, they reclaim their humanity. When societies rediscover the moral dimension of politics, they begin to heal. This transformation will not happen quickly. It is a long labor of the soul as much as of the state. The uprisings may fade from headlines, but the questions they posed endure. What does dignity mean? How can faith coexist with freedom? What kind of civilization can reconcile material progress with spiritual depth? The answers will emerge not from power, but from people, from their willingness to keep awakening again and again, until justice becomes as ordinary as breath. Thanks for listening.
Did you enjoy this book summary? Got ideas on how we can make it even better? Drop us a quick note. We're always listening and learning from you.